Welcome to our panel discussion sessions for 2020. We'll get started off today with the topic spirituality and classical dance. So as we navigate through life in a highly complex and connected world in the 21st century and ponder the question of human purpose and our place in the universe, I think there is an inevitable quest towards spirituality. Many people, irrespective of what stage of life they're at, feel a need to delve deeper into this concept and find ways to elevate their consciousness with a clear understanding that spirituality is a secular concept and not necessarily achieved only through the practice of a religion. So what role can the classical arts play in this quest for both the performer and the audience? How can the practice and performance of classical dance be a spiritual experience? In what ways and forms is spirituality embedded in classical dance? And does it have to be? Can an enriching experience be created without a spiritual component? So our distinguished panel today will help us explore this topic and get us thinking further about this intersection. So I'd like to request our panelists to come up to the stage, Ms. Malavika Sarukkai, Ms. Madhu Natraj, Ms. Purva Dhanashree, Ms. Apoorva Jayaraman, and our moderator, Ms. Srinidhi Chidambaram. I'd also like to request our Nritya Kalanidhi, Ms. Priyadashini Govind, to join the panelists on the stage and offer closing remarks at the end of the discussion. So many thanks to Srinidhi for her effort and support in curating the discussion and bringing the panelists together in preparation for this session so it can be a more engaging discussion for all of us. So the discussion will be for a duration of 90 minutes, and we'll reserve the last 15 minutes for Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, we have volunteers across the room with sheets of paper. Would request you to please write down your question, and we'll pass them along to the moderator to be posed to the panelist at the end of the session. So over to you, Srinidhi.
Namaste. Welcome to this morning's panel discussion on spirituality and classical dance, a very broad and overarching theme. It is indeed delightful and a great privilege to interact with our distinguished panelists and the erudite audience, and I thank the Music Academy for this opportunity. In order to delve deep into this subject in a fairly structured manner, we will begin with a brief context setting of the topic, followed by each one of our panelists who will discuss through word, performance, or audiovisual representations specific perspectives and views, which I will outline before each of their presentations. We will then do a briefer round of questions, time permitting, and then take final comments from our Nritya Kalanidhi, Srimati Priyadashini Govind, and then we can throw it open to the audience. Spirituality is a broad concept with room for many perspectives. There are many definitions and views on what spirituality actually denotes. Spirituality may be a sense of connection with something bigger than ourselves, or may involve a search for life's deeper meaning. People may describe a spiritual experience as sacred or transcendent, or even as a deep sense of just feeling connected. Quoting Dr. Christina Puchalski, director of the George Washington Institute of Spirituality and Health, she contends that spirituality is that aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. Some may find that their spiritual life is intricately linked with religion or their association with the place of worship. Others find comfort in a non-ritualistic relationship with God or a higher power. Still others may seek meaning through their connections to nature or to art. Like your sense of purpose, your personal definition of spirituality may change throughout your life adapting to your own experiences and journeys. Bhakti, another term which is often used synonymously with spirituality or sometimes not, literally means attachment, participation, homage, faith, love, devotion, worship. It can refer to the love and devotion of an individual towards God. It is one of the possible paths of spirituality towards moksha, as in Bhakti Marga. While spirituality may incorporate elements of bhakti, it is generally a broader concept. Bhakti and spirituality are not exactly the same thing, nor are they entirely distinct from each other. Indian classical dance forms can be described as being related to a spiritual experience for both the artist and the audience. They can also be described as a vehicle for portraying, expressing, and evoking bhakti. But as we mentioned earlier, they are not exactly identical statements. They can be a spiritual experience without overt religiosity, where art itself is sufficient to create that experience. Another perspective would be, do you need spirituality at all in a performing art? So today, we explore this extremely interesting and complex topic of spirituality and classical dance through the eyes of 4 brilliant artists, each one unique, diverse, and representative of their own distinct journeys, views, and styles of dance. We will take up several questions, dimensions, and angles relating to spirituality and classical dance. So first, I'm delighted to welcome a talented and multifaceted artist of the younger generation, Apoorva Jayaraman. She comes from a generation of younger artists who have started to perform in an era of shorter attention spans of audiences, performances packaged into capsule formats, and where we all have so much of noise, clutter, and frenzy around us, really not the ideal space for exploring or evolving into spirituality. So she would be discussing in the next 10 minutes how it is different for Gen Next artists. Does art become a primary gateway for them into spirituality rather than what might have been the reverse for previous generations? What in art contributes to a dancer's personal spiritual experience? Does abstraction and artistic experience rather than process and intellectualization help achieve spirituality in dance? How does an artist move from the personal experience to achieving a shared experience as a live stage performer? What are the techniques that go into achieving this? And in an even more distracted future generation of dance students, maybe now in their teens, how does it work, training and teaching them to make a more meaningful connection with dance? Apoorva.
Good morning to everyone. My greetings and respects to all the esteemed artists on stage and to the members of the audience. I would like to start by sharing that for many of us who have had the experience of performing or practicing any Indian classical art form, even if for a few years, this feeling of a certain unique sense of exhilaration is something that we are familiar with. A feeling, a sense of knowing, a sense of achievement that is not explicable. Yet, calling this as a spiritual experience was at first a term that was merely a term for me, really. It was jargon that I honestly felt very distant from. And this was in fact one of the primary reasons why this very topic of spirituality in Indian classical dance was the first topic we took up for discussion when we started the Navadisha conference for young people in 2017. I'm therefore very grateful to the Music Academy for having me as a part of this morning's panel and for giving me an opportunity to share here my reflections on the topic, and more importantly, for me to learn from the wisdom of all the senior artists present here. As someone who belongs to today's generation, my understanding is that young people of today are far removed from the idea of spirituality as it was understood even a half a century back. Bhakti is certainly no more a way of life. Balamma is quoted in her biography by Douglas Knight as saying, Bharatanatyam is grounded in bhakti. In fact, bhakti is at the center of all the arts of India, she says. Musicians and dancers of yesteryears believed very deeply that their dance and music meant nothing if it was not an offering to God. How many of us young people in this hall today can claim that we believe or we truly even comprehend the statement that we as artists are a mere tool in the hands of an almighty? My understanding is that this devotion to a personal God became, for these artists, a primary path into a spiritual experience. And art, in turn, became a tool that enabled this process and served to intensify this experience. In fact, the subject matter of the vast repertoire of compositions that we have inherited as musicians and dancers, in a way, bears testimony to this fact. In sharp contrast, when I went to college, ambiguity and agnosticism seemed to be the common feature across the entire spectrum of the young people's beliefs. It was extremely rare to find a young person who lived bhakti as a way of life. So then how do I define the term spiritual in the absence of the pursuit of a personal God? How do I define a spiritual experience purely in the context of art itself? One of my favorite definitions of what a spiritual experience means is from the writings of Fritjof Capra, and he uses interesting words saying, it is a non-intellectual experience of reality. Indian philosophy talks extensively about this idea of experiencing rather than intellectualizing towards a higher realization or towards creating a leap in knowledge, if we want to call it that. Dance can be one of the most effective tools in this process because we learn and we know by doing and not by thinking. Many studies today show that embodied learning, this idea that the body can inform the cognition just as much the mind can influence and control the body's actions, is a very powerful way of pushing the frontiers of human knowledge. Dance, of course, at its very basic level, is an extremely structured and skilled discipline. And all of us over here have certainly not had an academic experience learning dance. We primarily learn through observation, through imitation, and then repeating to perfect something. A dancer learns to deconstruct the rhythmic pattern of an aradi, or even a musician perhaps learns to develop manodharma in a raga, not through the conscious mind, but rather through this idea of embodied cognition, much the same way as we would learn to, say, ride a cycle or type on a keyboard. So dance is not just a physical exercise. It is an exercise that brings the alignment of mind and body, a practice of which hones one's ability to observe keenly, to be attentive, and to feel closer to whatever it may be that each of us seek. So what are we doing here if not harvesting in ourselves the ingredients for what we term as a spiritual experience? So the first point that I would like to make is that in this context, art itself can now serve as a primary gateway into this idea of spirituality when understood as an embodied, experiential understanding of reality. The second point I'd like to discuss today is, I've always wondered, as children, we have this infinite ability to imagine and be completely lost in that world of imagination. And I suppose this complete oneness with what we believe is true is perhaps one of our earliest experiences of a state of trance, so to say. And as we grow up, we very soon lose this ability to feel that oneness. I believe art has the power to reteach this ability to imagine to us as adults. We know that art is not a mere description of reality or an imitation of reality. It is only successful when an artist is able to extract the essence of a situation, a person, a thing that is being represented. So in a way, an artist is not describing reality, but being it. Studies in neuroscience have shown that the way the brain processes visual signals is actually not in a way that we take a picture with a camera, for instance, but more similar to the way one might take notes in a lecture or in a classroom. So the better the process of abstraction created by the artist, the brain is actually firing a much more powerful signal in response. So the better the abstraction, the more evocative the art. And so in this context, we're not referring, art is not a term used to refer to the product that has been created, but to that knowledge which is contained within the artist through which the art is made. Schopenhauer describes abstraction as that which helps reduce the distance between the perceiver and the perceived. Again, isn't this one of the primary features of what is considered a spiritual experience? The ability to feel oneness with something, perhaps something much larger than ourselves. Lastly, the interesting element again in art for me is that a performing art is a live, shared experience with an audience most of the times. So in dance, a moment of transcendence experienced by the artist in performance is actually being intercepted by an onlooker, and that too in a meaningful way. You can watch someone go literally disappear into an alternate world and re-emerge, so to say. And this stirs something in us that we really cannot fathom or understand. I still remember as a 14-year-old being in a class with Kalanidhi Mami and learning Pachai Maamalai Pol Meni. And usually her practice was to do a hand, and we would repeat that after her and then take down notes. But this one day, one hand rolled into the second rolled into the third, and before we knew it, it was 30 minutes of Mami exploring this Viritam. And I have no other way of describing this experience of what I saw than to literally say that she seemed lost to our world temporarily. So in a sense, the onlooker can now also touch and taste this otherworldly experience without having gone through the rigor that the artist has had to invest throughout their lives to create that experience for us. And this idea of transference is surely something very unique when we talk about spirituality in the performing arts, which is otherwise considered a very personal and a subjective experience. Surely something deemed as a spiritual experience cannot be entirely a borrowed one. An artist can perhaps show me only a glimpse of that experience, and the fact that this experience could be something worth pursuing, that it was worth putting in all the evident pain to go and get a taste of that experience through whatever means, through your own pursuit, not necessarily through art. So in a way, performing art is capable of reminding us of this pursuit of meaning and purpose that we have as human beings. And this, I think, is very special and a tangible contribution of the performing arts to us as a society. So I'd just like to quickly summarize the points that I've made today. I understand spirituality through art and not the other way around. And by redefining spirituality as a non-intellectual, embodied experience of reality, I now have a way of understanding that sense of exhilaration and also harvesting this to intensify the experience. And this experience of reality in dance does not come in a literal sense, but comes through abstractions. And the knowledge of that abstraction is in itself what we term as a spiritual exercise. And finally, art facilitates a transference of this experience to someone who walks into an auditorium with zero background, zero intent, zero preparation, which I think is extremely powerful. And in this sense, I feel dance, its practice, and its consumption in themselves become a gateway to spiritual experience, regardless of faith, personal beliefs, or content of presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Apoorva. Next, we have Madhu Natraj with expertise in both Kathak and contemporary dance. And I think it will be very interesting to understand her perspective on spirituality through two different prisms. Madhu will be looking at diverse areas of spirituality in her presentation, how she uses dance as a liminal space to pave way for spiritual experience, how has performing to content from the mystic Sufi philosophers and poets, how has that enabled her to experience the spiritual, whether dance itself is nothing but embodied spiritual experience. And then she would also look into Kathak and discuss the unique pluralistic nature of the style, which has influences from diverse religions, cultures, and beliefs.
I always have to adjust the mic. Namaskar, Vanakkam, and the permission of all the Gunijan and the Munijan sitting here. I'd like to begin. A topic of this vastness is overwhelming and very, very personal. So I'll begin with the infamous disclaimer most Kathak dancers make, koshish karungi. So for a Seh Hriday experience, may I be audacious and ask you to please close your eyes for 45 seconds as I play you something very, very meaningful. If you could just please close our eyes. We'll go back to closing our eyes. How do you merge with what you cannot see? How do you create form out of the formless? How do you listen to that which does not speak? It cannot be caught. It cannot be spoken to. It does not have a body. It is not inside this or outside that. It is beyond speech, mind, and thought. Yet it resides within you, of its own accord. Not knowing you are it, you search for something outside, something separate. Thank you. You may please open your eyes. From the cacophony of sounds that make up today's world, the philosophy of the 12th century mystics, the Sharanes, transported us to a space that offers reflection, respite, stillness. The Sharane Advaitins visualized the threshold as a potent point between life and death, a point where Sajiva Mukti occurs and they disappeared without a trace, like camphor on fire. Dance does this for me. It is that very transformational, liminal space which sometimes grants me the greatest spiritual experience. One that aligns my body, mind, and spirit and gives me clarity. Somatic intelligence, which you've spoken about, and the intuitive body add up as indispensable components of this experience for me. I have a dual identity as both a Kathak and an Indian contemporary dancer. And I believe that the Guru holds a very special place in my life for evolving a spiritual nature. My Kathak training was with Dr. Maya Rao, also my mother, and it was centered around philosophy, bhav batana, the Kathavachak strain, anthropology, and dance as embodied spirituality. We have all experienced the syncretic relationship of spiritual texts and dance through history. Just to give you one example, since we are short on time, while teaching us Niratata Dhang, which is a Lakshan Geet that describes the Kathak as embodied in the dance of Krishna, it has all the movement stock, and it's a spatio-temporal exploration of Kathak. Ma would time and again come to the last verse that Bindadeen Maharaj says. He says, Tum nath bin mohe ko baru, kon as jo bipat thadyo, Bindadeen pe kripa karo prabhu, vyape dukh nahi ang niratat dhang. Which loosely translated says that you, who will see us through obstacles, I ask you but one thing. Do not give us any pain and trouble in this body, because this is all I have, this vehicle to practice your dance and my spiritual journey. Very beautiful, of course. So the body as a dancer's vehicle for expression, spiritual evolution. It's also Ma who introduced me to ethnomusicologist Kurt Sachs, who would often call dance is life in ecstasy, or dance is the mother of all arts, referring to its composite nature. When you look at the repertoire of Kathak, the Thumris, for example, the music of love that I perform offers me a spiritual moment where the sensory and the sensual merge and collide. We are a pluralistic community. No, really, we are. In today's times, we may not think so, but we are. Kathak, through its turbulent history, demonstrated great inclusivity and ingenuity in the spiritual realm. So as we all know, I will not go down an art history lesson from the temples of North India and Rajasthan, facing many invasions and turbulent times. The dancers now refashion themselves as court dancers, and it is here that the Sufi philosophy and it enters the... I'm so sorry, I feel so bad standing with my back to all of you. So, philosophy, design, vocabulary, etc. In fact, it was a Muslim king, Nawab, Wajid Ali Shah, whose pen name was Akhtar Pia, who reintroduced the spiritual aspect of Kathak in the 19th century. Until then, as we know, the virtuoso element had taken over the spiritual aspect. He often performed himself as Krishna, as we all know, and had done many choreographies and wrote many books on dance too. I'd like to also mention at this point another ruler in the Bahmani kingdom of Bijapur, Hyderabad, etc., who would write in Dakhani. His name was Ibrahim Adil Shah II. And he wrote many, many years ago, again, a Sufi philosopher, poet, Amir Khusro would, about communal harmony, about peace. And I really think each of us artists have to have both a spiritual and a political conscience. So they brought this together, and he wrote a beautiful poem that I'd like to share with you all today, a ghazal, which we performed too, which is called Ek Nari Dekhiya Khadi Samne. This is in Dakhani, so it's a little different from the usual Urdu, Hindi, Sanskrit that we speak. He says that, who is this? I see this beautiful image of this beautiful woman, and Sufis visualize God as a woman. Of course, there's gender neutrality also in that space of spirituality. And says, who is this person? Who is she? The warm light of the moon that illumines our world? Or is she that flash of lightning that lights up dark, murky skies? Is she a Barhamini? Is she a Turkini? Is she a Muslim? Is she a Hindu? Is she a virgin? Is she a bride? A Suhagini? I know not who she is, but she brings to me the Dashavtar of Vishnu. It's a very beautiful philosophy, and many such that all of us artists come across. I'll take a very cursory look at my contemporary work because we don't have time. Actually, when I started with contemporary dance, it was a space of, I was always in the crossfire, getting, people asking me why is a good Kathak dancer standing on her head and talking about sexuality or insecurity or depression, etc. But I wanted to speak through my dance about those things and about my journey. And it's later, just like the koshas, and you finally come to your Anandmaya kosha, I think as I evolved, I started going back to, more spiritually uplifting pieces in some senses. The mystical, the exoteric. The esoteric has always attracted me more. And I think this is from a piece called Vajra, which looked at the diamond as a tangible form of divinity, as lightning, as the Devi, as the Kundalini Shakti. Also mandala, where, I just came across this concept of, the dancer's creation and the process, everything is embodied in us. We don't have a separate vehicle. And it's like a mandala. So the mandala is the cosmic flow plan of the universe, and that is reflected in our body as a universe by itself. So that piece was done, and also we had the DNA. I looked at it as a choreography of life. So what is to unfold now? I think we have, Kirti, if you can play it on silent, maybe can go on in the background. This was the bringing together. Also, I come from Bangalore, which is a very techno-savvy city. So for a designers conference, we created this mandala, earth, water, fire, air, the Panchabhuta mandala coming together as an interactive multimedia piece. There was also Kalpavriksha with S.G. Vasudev's work, which again looks like at nature as the hidden divinity in nature, etc. I'll move on. The goddess journey is a very important journey for me. And this is something that happened to me about 13 years ago. And as we mine from all our experiences, I did so too from a very turbulent time in my life. And I created a piece called The Womb of Brilliance, which looked at the feminine phenomenon as fearlessness, fecundity, and equilibrium. And from then on, I also started to go out of the performance space with my outreach work, which I was already doing in the realms of education and creativity, looking at Shakti as the capable will, Shakti as creativity, Shakti as limitless possibilities, and you could replace the word Shakti with dance for all these areas. So the Goddess Dances is a workshop that I create with my healer cousin in Sydney, and we did it across a few countries where we ask women and also men to place themselves at the center of their universe. Creativity workshops, also going to areas of healing with movement, mindfulness, and meditation. Plato had famously cited, "Man, you are God, but you forgot." So whether it is a whirling dervish in Konya, a Maibi high priestess in Manipur, a contemporary dancer in New York, a classical ballet dancer in Cape Town, a dancer here in the Music Academy, a trance dancer at a hippie commune, a shamanistic witch doctor in Africa, we are all connected through this phenomenon, a spiritual sutra called dance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madhu, for your very illuminating presentation. Purva Dhanashree is a young artist who has taken up the unique style of Vilasini Natyam, the art of the Telugu Devadasis. So in this segment, we focus on the apparent dichotomy that classical dance forms do have, sensuous yet spiritual. Purva, you're a practitioner of Vilasini Natyam. The content of this style of Natyam is quite heavily Sringara oriented. Not only that, the traditional ancient practitioners performed a variety of compositions. Some, of course, were steeped in bhakti for the temple, some at courts, and so on. They not only emphasized Sringaram but also performed pieces that were quite risque in content, but they say it was without a trace of vulgarity. To quote from the book When God is Customer, the emotional tone of a Telugu padam is radically different, in that the atmosphere of tormenting separation, viraha, is sometimes boldly turned on its head by a role reversal, where God and woman are involved in a kind of a teasing hide and seek, with money even as part of the stakes, and the woman is an active independent partner to the game. So I would like to ask you to elaborate on the following themes. What is your take on bhakti and spirituality, and how do they feature in your journey as an exponent of Vilasini Natyam? How do you meet the challenge interpreting the ancient dance of Vilasini Natyam in modern times? How does the intense, passionate, explicit, Sringara-based repertoire of your style play a role in spiritual fulfillment through dance? What do you think was the rationale for these compositions? Was there a spiritual intent at all? And as a woman of today, how do you relate contextually to these compositions? Welcome, Purva.
My namaskarams to all the gurus, shishyas, rasikas. It's indeed a beautiful moment to be a part of this sadas. Deeply grateful to Music Academy. I recall this performance of my guru Swapna Sundari, in which she had mehendi on her hands. And she tells the Nayaka, "Please dress me. I cannot use my hands." Put the tilakam and everything. And towards the end, she finished this piece in a bhakti way, where she says, "I cannot be without you. I have to surrender to you. I don't need this mehendi anymore." In another performance, she finished this piece as, "I cannot be without touching you. I don't need this mehendi anymore." So for me, spirituality, and this piece has guided me in my understanding of these two concepts, bhakti and spirituality. I don't find any difference between the two, as I feel that if I'm not connected to myself, others, and a society deeply with compassion, understanding, and a sense of belonging, then what is the point of connecting to a deity? Also, it is not enough for me to just connect outside if I'm not able to go deep within myself. So indeed, a deity for me at this stage of my life is very essential. The form is very essential for self-exploration and self-expression. And I'm deeply grateful to my mother, Kamalini Dutt, my father, Kuber Dutt, for bringing me up, training me, making me sensitive towards both these concepts. My father was a Marxist. When he married my mother, he didn't believe in God, a complete atheist. My mother is very spiritual, she was very religious, but she has given me a wonderful experience of understanding religion in a holistic manner. And in my journey of Vilasini Natyam, I have come to understand the role of Devadasi. She's not just Devadasi. She is a Bhogam. She is a Sani. She is a wife. She is a Guru. She is Artavaladi. And through the extensive repertoire of Vilasini Natyam, I got to play these roles of a lover, of a friend, of a critic, of a wife. And pieces like Mela Kulupu, Churnika, Baliharan, Pallaki Seva, Kumbhaharati, Hecharika, Lali, Varnam, Padam, all these pieces enable me to live different roles of a performer and understand, as far as I can, the psyche of a Devadasi. And I recall those moments when I performed in the Rangbagh temple, performed the Nitya Sevas and Naimitya Sevas. Was it a performance? No. Was it a ritual in the real sense? I don't think so. I can never match to what the Vidya Vilasini did in her times. But the experience has changed me inside out, and I try to bring that change in my journey in Vilasini Natyam. How has Vilasini Natyam come to this stage in modern times? Like all Dasi atoms, which are practiced now and were practiced centuries ago, in temple, court, chamber, and public arena, Vilasini Natyam has also made that journey. The purpose in these contexts was to connect to God, entertain the intelligentsia, inform and educate the general public, and I think the purpose of art even today is the same. External factors have changed, like the stage, the audience, the duration of performance, formatting of the performance, but the relevance and function of any classical dance is very much the same. The compositions help us to connect to a higher spirit. They help us to delve deep into the similes, metaphors, images, and I think they educate us about ourselves and about the people. How do I express bhakti and spirituality through an intense Shringara composition? And how does the repertoire help me in my spiritual fulfillment? Like a rainbow is formed with rain and sunshine, I think to understand life, we need these two flavors of bhakti and Shringara. And talking about the performance, I think the key is intent. With what intent am I doing an erotic piece? Even if it is very erotic composition, the important aspect is with what approach, with what involvement I am doing that composition, for whom. And I feel Shringara Bhakti are two sides of the same coin. If we bring down Shringara to a very superficial level and don't go deep into the lyrics, then it is very momentary. It's like immediate gratification. And when Shringara is intense, the artist explores metaphors, images, and takes the word beyond just the literal meaning of the word, and the word acquires a new meaning. And I think there we don't say it's Shringara or Bhakti. I think it reaches a different level of understanding. And it also depends on the lyrics, because who wrote for whom, in what context is very important. So here I would like to share with you a piece from Adhyatma Ramayana. Because in Vilasini Natyam, the vast repertoire helps us to go from one range, one end of the spectrum of Shringara, to the other end of the spectrum, that's Bhakti. And in this piece, the Nayika is describing Rama. It was traditionally performed in the temples, Adhyatma Ramayana.
Bhava కనకరుచిరవస్త్రం రత్నవత్కుండలాఢ్యం రత్నవత్కుండలాఢ్యం కమల విశదనేత్రం కమల విశదనేత్రం సానుజం రామమీడే సానుజం రామమీడే సానుజం రామమీడే సానుజం రామమీడే సానుజం రామమీడే.
What is the rationale behind explicitly erotic compositions? Was there a spiritual intent at all? I think it depends on the context. It's not necessary that every piece is about Jivatma and Paramatma. There were human situations depicted. For example, a piece which says that if you don't give me money, I will not be with you. Or give me this much money for this act, that much money for that. I don't think there is any spiritual content at all. And talking about a Nayaka coming back with all the telltale marks and this lady complaining, I think it's just a simple human situation which is very contemporary, which many of us have faced, and an emotion which people would like to feel again, go through it again. But I don't think there is any spiritual intent at all. So I here wish to show you a piece of Ekanta Seva, in which this Nayika is a Parakiya Nayika, and she tells Krishna that we've been together, now you please go, because my husband is going to come. And Ekanta Seva. So what will people outside say when they see you go from my house? So please leave now. We have been together in 64 acts of love. You understand me, so please leave. And to conclude, how do I, a woman of today, relate to these pieces and their context? Before choosing a piece, I ask myself, is this piece helping me to understand myself better? Is this character elevating me in my understanding of dance, life, and people? Is this relevant for today's audience? So these are the points which I take into consideration while taking up a composition, because I feel as an artist I'm very much responsible for myself and the artist and the art world and the growth and understanding of a dance form like Vilasini Natyam.
Thank you, Purva, for that wonderful presentation. The journey of a student of dance is long and arduous, as we all know, and it is neither easy nor even achievable by all that one can move from first performing merely the taught gestures, then starting to feel and emote to the words of a shloka or a padam or a kirtana in praise of God, and then evolve into a state where dance itself, the dancing body itself, becomes a spiritual experience for the artist and the audience. How does one become capable of elevating oneself and the audience to a spiritual experience beyond bhakti? How do you create the spiritual experience without the props of words and lyrics? As an iconic artist who has extensively performed for many decades now, I would request you, Malavika, to simply take us through your incredible journey. For you today, spirituality is not defined by the text of God, but moves much beyond that. How did you arrive at this space?
Namaskaram. Greetings for the new year. Greetings for this next year of a lot of dancing for all of you. Yes. Because dancers, as performers, we train so hard that finally what we really want to do is dance. Live the moment, live the experience, journey within. Take flight. Take flight from the ordinary. Take flight from that which binds us. It's not an escape, but actually it's just getting to another zone. I'm going to just speak to you briefly about my experience of the last 40, 50 years. I thank Srinidhi for inviting me here and the Academy for hosting such an interesting and important discussion, especially in these days when the move is really about the physicality of the performance and the attraction of the performance. But these are just some questions we as artists ask ourselves when we try to endeavor to penetrate a classical dance form like Bharatanatyam in my case. So what I'm going to say this morning is very much about personal experience. I thought it'd be interesting to start with a quote from Ananda Kumaraswamy's article on Rajput painting. The Holy Land is the land of our own experience. All is in all, and if beauty is not apparent to us in the well-known, we shall not find it in things that are strange and far away. Unquote. When one reads a quote like this, for me it crystallized the rasa theory, where the dancer artist, by intense envisioning of the moment, creates the sacred experience in the here and now. I think that becomes, at least for me, it's been the purpose of why I dance. Because as a student of dance, my earliest memories of even coming close to something with the sacred or divine was when Guru Kalyanasundaram taught me Adum Chidambaram. I was all of 12, and he made sure that there were a lot of poses in the composition so that I could just get into all the poses and feel that I was creating something. But what was interesting was when my mother was always in class with me, she saw all my practices, and she was an ardent devotee, shall we say, of dance, is that I found that she was very moved by this. So when I was looking at her and she was so moved, I thought, oh, this must have something in it. Because obviously it didn't touch me much at that point, but then I was 12. So I grew up in an environment where my mother was particularly drawn to the sacred, the spiritual, philosophy. And it is interesting, many years later when I looked at my Arangetram brochure which she had brought out, of course I had no idea what she was doing, all these things. All I knew was I had to dance what my guru had taught me, and that was sufficient. So I didn't bother to engage my mind any other way. But she had included this verse in my Arangetram brochure, verses from Tirukuta Darshana, forming the 9th tantra of Tirumula's Tirumandiram. The dancing foot, the sound of the tinkling bells, the songs that are sung and the varying steps, the form assumed by our dancing Gurupara. Find out these within yourselves, then shall your fetters fall away. So I grew up with this other purpose to dance, because she never ever told me that I should make it entertainment. She never asked me to do anything which was janaranjikam, because she always believed that dance was a creative expression, and that through dance, through this, the channel of dance, through the passage of dance, that the dancer actually goes towards something else. And this played a very important, made a very significant impression on me. And so I think over the years I shaped the repertoire I danced differently. Learning the Margam repertoire, I know many people have, dancers here have commented on it, but a question which I struggled with for many years was Sringara Bhakti. It was an emotion for me which was very difficult to entwine, and especially when I thought, and particularly when it meant it in the Varnams, Padavarnams, or in the Padams, when I had to think of Sringara Bhakti entwined, it was, for me personally, a difficult challenge. Because when I looked at Sringaram, I thought it was so much about the body. It was a celebration of the body. It was about the senses. It was about the fullness of the senses. It was in the body. And somehow when I thought of bhakti, the way I understood it, was something which was from the body, something which moved me from it. And so this became a question. I questioned the Varnam repertoire. I questioned whether it was God King or King God. What was I supposed to do? How was I supposed to interpret this? What was the context for me? What was the context of the Padavarnams themselves? How could I place it in my life? Because dance did have to relate in a more personal way to what I could do. I needed to dance it with a certain honesty of what I could actually experience or believe in. So with these questions of King God and God King, I struggled. And then I wondered, was I supposed to celebrate the body or was I supposed to sublimate the body? What was expected? And how do I investigate this emotion so I can transit from the first half to the second half, which again for me was problematic. So keeping in mind my temperament and my understanding and what I felt I could live and experience through my dance, I chose certain varnams which I could handle, which I could negotiate, which I could go through. But interestingly, I found that when I came to, say, Andal's Nachiyar Tirumuri, I could understand Sringara Bhakti very well. I could understand the duality of these emotions. I could see how they were entwined. I could see her experience, or I could at least relate to it and hopefully envision this. And so it is, by a lot of choice, I included certain repertoire into my whole dancing, shall we say, the vast repertoire I had. So I did pieces from Srimad Bhagavatam because I wanted to celebrate the seasons. I wanted to celebrate myth because I believe that really holds, it is of great importance in classical dance that we retell myth, that we relive it. And through the retelling, we recreate it again. But all this I found really was, I had lyrics, I had descriptions which eased me into this view of spirituality or bhakti. But when I speak of it as an artist, as a performer, as the dancing body itself, just when I look at it as the dancing body, initially for me, the hastas, the descriptions were all, they were support systems I could understand. And they took me, they held me, and they supported me towards the within. But as I danced more and as I internalized more the experience of the dance, I realized what I was talking about, or what I was really recreating, were just energies. Then hastas, everything sort of started falling away. And I said, what I'm actually finding, for me, what is the spiritual is not so much the description, but the energy within. The energy that I'm able to create in the body and the energy that I'm able to create in space. Just to, an interesting incident. I was dancing one day in rehearsal. My mother was with me. She was watching this rehearsal, and I was doing Mahishasuramardini. And I was working it out with my musicians. We were all in practice. And it's about a 20-25 minute piece. And I had done it once, but as dancers, we're never happy. So there was always something I wanted to tweak, I wanted to change something. And I told them, I said, we can't just fix it in the program, but we have to fix it in the rehearsal. So I said, no, we must do this all over again. So it was dusk time, it was just evening time. And I said, no, we have to run the whole piece. Of course, they didn't like that. They didn't want to run the whole piece, but I insisted. I said, no, for the full flow, the energy which is from beginning to end, we have to run it fully without any break. And so we ran it once more. It was very intense. The musicians were wonderful. And everybody was in the mood, and it was extraordinary. Once this rehearsal was over, they very quietly picked up their things and left the room. Nobody spoke, which is also a bit strange, which it didn't strike me then. After that, I stood and I asked my mother, I said, do you sense the presence? Do you sense the presence? Because on that day, in my dance studio, there was a presence. There was a presence of an energy. There was a silence which was palpable. There was a silence that was lived. So I went and sat next to my mother and I said, do you hear it? And she said, yes. So we both sat and just sat with the silence. When one comes to those kind of moments, we realize that the dancing body is the site of the sacred. It does. It is the site, And through the dancing body, through the instrument, as some of these wonderful dancers have used the word instrument, that it actually, it takes on much larger perspectives. So then it's not defined, it's not about the entertainment, it's not about the attraction, it's about creating a presence which is much larger than ourselves. And when one touches moments like that, that kind of energy, it gives you another reason to dance. It guides you in another direction. Because you say you've found some moment of some bliss, perhaps, I don't know. You can call it anything. You can call it God, or you can call it magic, or you can call it beauty, or a beauty of spirit. It really doesn't matter what you call it. But I think what happens with the dancing body, I think the experience of it, sometimes these are not guarantees. I can't say every time I dance Mahishasuramardhi, I'm going to hit something. I'm not. It is an arduous process which requires a lifetime of give. It's a lifetime. We can't say, oh, I did 5 hours of practice, therefore, something's going to happen. Nothing might happen. Nothing might ever happen. So it's the process of saying, how can I tune the instrument of the body, which takes on other resonances. It takes on another spirit, to say, can we go beyond the hasta? Can we go beyond description? Can we go beyond the name of a god or a goddess? Can I exult? Can I find this moment of bliss in a sunrise or in the opening of a flower? I remember when I was doing Timmakka, some of you might have seen it, when from Karnataka, the village woman who plants trees because she doesn't have children. I remember dancing it, and the moment the seed actually breaks ground and comes up, that for me is a spiritual moment. It has no God, but it's the moment of this life, this moment of birth. So I think what, for me, the way I understand spirituality is really not defined by just, gods and goddesses, because I find even in pure dance, there is spirituality. If one touches a moment of Shruti, I've spoken about it often, one touches a moment of alignment, then one touches something else. It touches. It's easy to speak about it, but believe me, very difficult to find. It's very difficult to find this in dance practice, because it requires the kind of mindfulness and attentiveness and a kind of surrender and a slight dislocation of the me. Because as long as the me exists center stage, these things, we don't find space for it. So one has to generally subdue the sense of me or I. I am dancing. For me, a final thing is when we look at dancing, when we see, if you can leave the program by saying you saw the dance and not the dancer, that is the moment. Do we see the dance? Or are we preoccupied with wanting to see the dancer? Must the dancer center stage herself? These are questions. Or does she speak of a larger vision? These are questions, as I said, I've asked myself and troubled myself with over decades. And the questions go on, and the experience goes on, and hoping to find in all this some moment of spirituality. I think we're finished. Yeah. So I'm not going to show a clip because I've spoken too much.
Thank you, Malaka. That was fascinating. So now we have, I think we have time for a very quick round of some more questions, after which we would like to hear the views of Srimati Priyadarshini, and then we will throw it open to the audience, or either way as you decide. So I just would like any of you to take these questions and answer them very briefly, more like a rapid fire round. So one question is, how do you teach a student of dance about portraying spirituality? Is there a set format, or just leave it to the student to ultimately discover? Priyaka, you can also please enlighten us if you would like to. Anybody can answer this.
I'm not sure I'm the best equipped person to answer this question of how to teach, but I feel in the process of the teaching and learning between student and guru, what the teacher really does for you is point you to beauty, if one may call it that, where you didn't see it before, and point you in the path which I think is embedded within the craft itself, for you to go from where you are towards that beauty that you see. And perhaps down the end of that path is that sense of transcendence that exists, but that is something that the student has to put in that hard work to get there, to experience.
But the
that.
teacher is paramount in that,
Absolutely.
leading you to that
Absolutely.
start of that
And
journey.
even making you aware of that sense or that experience, a taste of which you should be hungry to want and go towards.
Right. Thank you. Does being an artist make you a better person, assuming that spirituality and what you dance is about God, and it does it make you a more humane and compassionate person? How does the spiritual aspect of either dancing, conveying bhakti, or through the dancing body, does it somewhere reflect upon you as a person to be more of a humane and compassionate human being?
If it always did, it would be fantastic. But I think as we are human beings and we are frail and egoistic and full of ourselves, this doesn't really happen. It's a question, I think, of thirst, of saying how much do you want to internalize the spiritual? Or, as I said, whatever word you all want to use to categorize this emotion we're talking about. So I think it's very, very, very individualistic, and it's about each artist or each person in the audience here of saying, just because we go to the temple, are we spiritual? I don't know. Question mark. So I think it's about how much one wants to internalize it and how much one wants to live close to it, which is a task. These things are difficult to do. It's easier to be egoistic than to be empathetic. It's easier to be full of yourself rather than to think of others. So I think it's, as I said, it would be a very golden world if we all could just, we dance a piece and therefore we are it. Unfortunately not.
Also, I think just adding to that, this space where we perform, the sacred space as we call it, the moment, all gurus say, the moment you leave your chappals outside, apni problem, apni sab kuch chhod ke andar aao. And nothing places us in the present moment like dance does. But like Malaji said, is it possible to then replicate it in your life? Do you want to? And it's also about the experience. How much of it do you want to continue in your life? So that's, I think, a very conscious choice.
The other thing that I wanted to ask you is, yes, we've spoken about spirituality, the moment, and then the whole artistic sensibility and all that. But ultimately, we are performers of a performing art. And whatever your personal spiritual journey may be, what does the artist actually owe to people who have paid and come and, are watching? It's like a performance finally, and then we have the critics. So where do they come into this whole personal journey which they try to communicate to the audience? Or is it all about technique, performance, and then whether, there's some obligation that, it has to kind of, really gel with the audience or whoever reviews the performance? Those are the more mundane aspects of performing. So what about all that? Your own technique, is that equally important, so to say?
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I believe that if an artist is immersed, right, in whichever discipline, then they have seen far because they're doing it all the time. They're living it. They're breathing it. They're living it. So if one has seen far, what I would like to do is I would like to take all of you to where I've gone. To say, I have seen this far. Would you like to share this journey? Do you want to come along and discover what I've discovered? Because perhaps you have not yet seen it, but I've seen something. And these treasures are like so embedded deep. And they're not on the surface. So we have to, all our life goes in just trying to mine it, to discover it. And if you're thirsty, we keep searching. And for me, I think what I would really like to do for the audience is to say, come with me and see what I can see.
Fantastic.
I think that's what drives me. I hope all the audience is okay with it. Because, you might not have seen these things in dance. You might not have. But an artist who's immersed has. So I think it's about saying, okay, follow. It's okay to follow once in a way, isn't it?
In that context, I'd like to ask you, Madhu, also about, in Kathak particularly, from what we see, there's also, a lot of emphasis on rhythm, and, there's this whole thing of, even in Bharatanatyam now we have these long tirmanams, so it's all about a spectacle. Supposing you were just performing a rhythmic or a kind of an absolutely dazzling piece of footwork or the chakras, does that also create a spiritual moment for you or for the audience, or it's just about wow and clapping kind of thing?
Absolutely, it does. I think it's about creating that experience and the energy, as she spoke about too. I remember my ma used to say that when she went to Shambhu Maharaj Ji to study, he says, "Kya seekhna hai?" And she said, "Abhinay." She's saying, "Beta, taliyan nahi milengi." So she said, "I don't want those talis, I want..." So I think each of us is also looking to invite that stillness in our lives, because it's that space that helps you to create. And I think it's like Kali, right? Being the eye of the storms, even if you're doing this, And also I think Kathak is probably the only form which has the pirouette aspect as many, and probably came from the whirling dervishes, which was about the same thing, right? Losing connection with the mundane and then connecting to the absolute. So I'm sure to each one it's different. And I also remember once Mayaji was teaching a student of hers, and koi Ashtapadi, and they were immersed in this, and suddenly somebody walked in and said, check sign kijiye, or something like that. And she says, dekho, hum log abhi Vrindavan mein hain. So I think it's about creating that energy and that experience.
Whatever you dance. I think now we will take questions. Yeah, just one question. Okay. How do we avoid being exploited, misguided, misled by spirituality, or confusing it with religiosity? This is from David, and this is addressed to everyone. I think we've already discussed this religiosity and spirituality divide, but I'm not sure what this really means. I mean, exploited, misguided. Is the person here in the audience?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, because some of this is being described very subjectively. So, for instance, the way Malavika madam described how this experience comes to you, something that cannot be described in words, and it happens once in a blue moon. It might not ever happen to you, and yet your pursuit is towards that. I mean, anybody can take that and tell you, well, this is the way you need to go to achieve that. And, you will end up listening to it, but you understand, the goal is not very clear. It's not achievable, it's not in front of you, it's not objective, it's not, you understand what I'm saying, it's not literal. So if you are in pursuit of something that is, oh, Tyagaraja saw it, or Malavika experienced it, how does that relate to me as a dancer?
But isn't it
And-
more about a personal journey? Because it's not like I have to get 100% and get into IIT. It's not a goal like that.
Yeah.
I think
I
it's,
understand that. I
it's
understand
more like
that.
a personal journey, and you might not even want that goal. So I think it's a personal choice, but I will let Malavika answer
No, I
that.
think to just, perhaps clear things, because there was not enough time to say all these things. You could perhaps approach a moment of spirituality, if you want to use that word, through alignment for a dancer. If the body and mind is very finely aligned, right? If you get it right together, then with a certain mindfulness, I know you use the word, Madhu, I think with that, it is a pointer in that direction. It is a moment to be experienced, but if you say, how do I get there, is to say, can I align the body and mind to such a fine degree through dance practice, if you're talking of dance practice, that through that alignment, through that experience of that momentary alignment, I might find something. But it is experiential at the deeper levels. I don't know if it makes it a little clearer.
Also, spirituality, dance and spirituality have that or anything in common, right? You don't become a dancer overnight. How can you find your spiritual journey immediately? It's also iteration, etc. I don't usually quote Godman, but I remember one such saying the other day. Somebody said to him, I just want to dissolve in the divine. So he said, take a huge tub of sulfuric acid and just jump into it. So because this is something that you have to work towards. And each of us has our own journey to get there. And not to forget that we also are not some sort of demigoddesses up there on stage. We also have to go out there and pay bills and do things. We're balancing that also.
Swapnaka told me that every Devadasi who served in the temple was necessarily not spiritual. For some, it was only a job. They went to the temple only for money. And it's not necessary that whole day, if you keep reciting the name of God, you will become religious or spiritual. So as you said, it's an individual journey. Even being in that space, doing the ritual every day, it can just be a mere job for someone. So I think, like she said, you can see the God in the rising sun, or you cannot see God in the temple itself. So.
Be done? So now I request Priyaka to give her concluding remarks.
Thank you for a most interesting morning. And I feel this is really a very thought-provoking topic, spirituality, because, these are the kind of questions also that are very common, because a lot of us, even I grew up with a lot of confusion about bhakti, about religion, about spirituality. So I don't think any of us have instant answers, but what I understood today was I loved the concept of being unfettered. It is such an important word, because that which allows you to fly, to move beyond. But it comes out of a depth of knowledge, out of the depth of search. So only as you go deeper, then the binds, you have also the ability and the strength to go higher. What also was very clear was it is in the practice, it is in the detail that you find the abstraction. It is in the detail and in the constant, in the rigor, that you learn to transcend. So the words today that to me stood out were transcendence, unfettered, a personal journey, extremely subjective, and the rigor of discipline and repeated, practice, sadhana. it is, I think, one of the questions that you posed about, what it is an audience comes to see. How do they understand spirituality, or is it, do they come to have a spiritual experience, or what is it that they come for? And I think it is it is according to the level and experience of the dancer or the performance that they see. Miss Malavika, Sarukkai Malavika ji, what she, the kind of vision she has and what she would like the audience to experience comes out of her life of sadhana, comes out of the point where she is. But I think also young dancers may not have that kind of a depth of knowledge or experience or vision, right? It's after all a process. And what then works is technique. What works is the intense practice of the art form, and the sincerity and integrity of approach and good guidance by the Guru. I think that is very important, what they point to, as Apoorva was saying, because finally it is what is inside the dancer is what is seen by the audience. If there is integrity of purpose, there is deep commitment to practice and form, there is honesty, and there is that immersion and also that understanding that they get from the pointing and the guidance of the Guru. I think that's what the audience, the sum of total of all that is what the audience sees. So I think these questions are questions that are eternal, and also they mean different things to you at different points in your life, and there are no right answers or exact answers. But I think what is most interesting is the rigor of discussion. The fact that you talk about it, you try to articulate it in terms that we can all, relate to, which then gives all of us some kind of a trigger or a point to think about, which then influences the art that we practice. So I thank you for a most informative and invigorating session.
Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful session, which I really enjoyed moderating, and each one of your views was absolutely delightful, thought-provoking. Thank you once again.
If you don't mind me breaking protocol, I won't be able to sleep tonight. I haven't thanked the Music Academy, Kami, and you for inviting us, and also my student Kirti, who drove down to be able to run my multimedia. Thank you so much. Sorry for doing this.